She wasn't allowed to speak. Not in that boardroom. Not with those suits. Not with the weight of her skin, her hair, her accent dragging behind every word like a shadow that didn't belong. The email had been clear. Attendance for observers only. No contributions permitted. But she spoke anyway. And they ignored her completely, like wind brushing past a statue. Until the CEO leaned forward, smirking without warmth, and said, "We don't pay interns to lecture executives." Silence. Lana sat back down slowly, her voice swallowed whole by a room designed to silence people like her. She wasn't surprised, just reminded that was Monday. By Friday, the entire board would be dismantled, and her voice would be the one echoing in every news headline in the country. Lana Jones had learned to observe before she spoke. It was a survival skill honed from the back row of classrooms, the side halls of elite conferences, the margins of corporate emails. A 23-year-old black woman with honors from a school no one cared to pronounce, interning in a firm where legacy mattered more than labor, Callow and Hurst Global Strategies. A billion-dollar consultancy nestled in a 70th floor tower with walls lined in real oak and egos. Lana had landed the internship through a fellowship aimed at diverse emerging leaders, which meant they needed someone brown on the brochure, but not at the table. She knew it. She stayed quiet. At first, until she noticed the numbers. 3 weeks into her internship, she'd been assigned to assist in a low-priority audit. A misnomer. The audit revealed a subcontract in East Africa, funneling millions into shell companies' projects, labeled as development investments that hadn't produced a single local job. She brought it to her assigned manager. He laughed. "Yeah, that one's been buried for years. No one touches it. Keep moving." She didn't. Quietly, she began documenting. Screenshots, PDFs, internal memos, voice notes she wasn't supposed to have. Lana wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing clarity. By week 5, she had enough to know it wasn't just fraud. It was exploitation disguised as philanthropy. Entire communities erased on spreadsheets written in English from a tower far away. She tried again. This time, directly to senior analyst Ruth Bannister, a woman who had once spoken about equity during an all-hands Zoom. Lana hoped that meant something. Ruth looked at the files, nodded once, then said, "Leave it to me." 2 days later, Lana's access to the internal server was revoked. No explanation. No apology, just silence. And then the email. "Your internship will conclude at the end of this cycle. Thank you for your time." Her badge still worked. Her desk hadn't been reassigned. But the message was clear. She was done. Only ... She wasn't. Friday morning arrived with clouds. Not in the sky inside Lana. She sat on the subway in a pressed white shirt, a flash drive under her coat, and a letter in her bag addressed not to HR, but to the press. She had given the company time. She had asked. She had begged the system to be better than it was. And now she was done asking. By 9:07 a.m., Lana was back on the 70th floor. The receptionist looked confused. "I'm here to observe the global ethics meeting," Lana said, flashing the now meaningless badge. It was on the calendar. It was. She had checked. Room 702B. Glass walls. 12 executives. 1 diversity officer. 1 agenda. New global partnerships. It wasn't meant for interns. It wasn't meant for truth. But truth walked in anyway. They didn't notice her at first. They noticed when she stood up mid-slide deck, holding a flash drive. "I have evidence of financial misconduct," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Deliberate misrepresentation of international funds under the East Africa Initiative. The room froze. She could feel them calculating not the facts, but the risk. "Sit down, Ms. Jones," one director said, still flipping through a printed report. "This is not. I have recorded communications in timestamped documents," she said louder. "This firm has knowingly profited from false philanthropic projects for 5 years." She placed the flash drive on the center table like a knife in a courtroom. Silence. Ruth Bannister stood slowly, her expression unreadable. "Lana, may I speak with you privately?" she said with that polished threat wrapped in fake concern. But Lana didn't move. Instead, she took out her phone and tapped one button. The live stream began. On her public account, 2,000 followers tuned in, then 10,000, then journalists, and she began to read. Memos, emails, financial entries, a timeline. "This isn't a whistle," she said. "It's a reckoning." No one moved. The screen behind the CEO still glowed with a paused slide on emerging markets in the global south, its colorful graphs suddenly absurd. Lana's voice cut through the silence with precision, each word a blade unsheathing years of complicity. "This contract," she said, holding up a printed page, "was marked as a community solar initiative. Funds were wired quarterly to a firm called Baratech Solutions." She tapped her phone again. On the live stream, she pulled up a satellite image. "This is the location of the supposed solar site," she continued. "Taken yesterday. It's a patch of dust, no construction, no panels, no jobs. And yet, over $4.2 million had been funneled there since 2021. A rustle. The CEO leaned forward, jaw tightening. "This isn't the place or time, Miss Jones," he said with careful authority. "We'll handle this internally." "No," Lana replied. "You had your chance. You handled it by silencing me, revoking my credentials, ending my internship early." Her gaze shifted to Ruth. "You told me to trust you." Ruth didn't blink. "I did," she said quietly. "But you don't understand how this works, Lana. I understand perfectly. I understand that pretending to care is more profitable than actual integrity. That people like me, brought in for optics, are disposable the moment we speak." She looked at each face around the table, naming what they wouldn't. "You built an empire on exploitation. You called it strategy. You called it innovation. But it's theft. And today, it ends." The door opened. Security. 2 suited men entered, glancing nervously between the executives and Lana. "I'll walk," she said before they could speak. "But you won't stop the broadcast. And you won't stop what comes next." She turned, not waiting for their permission. Outside, in the glass elevator, she pressed her hand to the wall and exhaled. Her phone buzzed comments, reposts, journalists requesting interviews. The story was viral. Not because of her name, but because of what it exposed, the carefully curated myth of ethical capitalism unraveling in real time. She exited the building and disappeared into the streets like smoke. By noon, the firm released a statement. An unfounded and irresponsible breach of confidentiality by a former intern. "We are conducting an internal review." Lana read it while sitting on the floor of a community center in Harlem, surrounded by people who understood exactly what unfounded usually meant. She wasn't alone anymore. A former employee messaged her. Then another. Then someone from finance sent an anonymous tip. "Check the Caymans. Look for M Equity Forward. It's the same execs. Different mask." By nightfall, she had the full structure mapped. Shell companies. Fake partnerships. Billions rerouted through names that sounded noble. It wasn't just Africa. It was South Asia, South America. Black and brown labor in every direction, invisibilized by glossy corporate reports. She built a dossier, published it as a PDF, permanently archived. It spread like fire. Within 48 hours, 3 board members resigned. Within a week, the Department of Justice opened an investigation. Within 2, Ruth Bannister issued a public apology, but not to Lana, To the shareholders, Lana stayed quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew they expected her to scream. Instead, she strategized. She partnered with independent journalists, pro bono lawyers, and grassroots organizers. She told them, "This isn't just about one company. This is how the entire system survives. We need more than punishment. We need prevention." And she meant it. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in repair. A month later, a summit was held at NYU titled "The Invisible Labor Behind Global Profit." Lana was asked to speak. She declined. But she sent a video. In it, she sat in the same white shirt, in front of a bookshelf filled with community literature and legal codes. "I am not a whistleblower," she said. "I'm a witness. A witness to how power protects itself, how institutions bend language to hide harm." She paused. "I was humiliated, ignored, fired, but not broken. Because truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a platform." The room applauded. But the real applause was online millions of views, shares, captions. "Let Black women speak." And then came the email. From the new acting CEO, it said, "We would like to invite you to consult on our ethics restructuring initiative." Lana laughed out loud when she read it. She didn't reply. Not immediately. Instead, she opened a blank document titled Terms of Engagement. She listed her conditions. Full transparency, public accountability, and most importantly, no decisions without lived experience at the table. Only then did she write back. One sentence. "I'll come on my terms." Her first meeting as a consultant was held in the same boardroom where she'd been silenced. But this time, her voice wasn't questioned. It was requested. A strange reversal. The chairs were the same, but the energy was different. Some faces were new. Others avoided her gaze entirely. She didn't smile. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to reform a system that had been built to exclude people like her until it needed them for redemption. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Let's begin," she said, opening her folder. "First, we need to talk about power, and who's allowed to hold it." Her proposal wasn't polite. She outlined a complete dismantling of the firm's global strategy division, replacing it with an accountability council, composed of community leaders from the very regions the company claimed to serve. Not advisors, not tokens. Decision makers. Next, she demanded full audits of all philanthropic initiatives, dating back 10 years, to be published publicly with real names, not corporate shells. Someone cleared their throat. An older man at the table, a partner since the 90s, interrupted. "Ms. Jones, we appreciate your passion. But you have to understand, the market doesn't respond well to ... exposure. We're already under federal scrutiny." Lana looked at him like he was a museum artifact. "I'm not interested in what comforts the market," she replied. "I'm interested in what protects people." Silence. Then someone clapped, quietly at first. It was the new interim director, a queer Latinx woman who'd been recently promoted. She had seen Lana on the live stream and pushed for her return. "Let her finish," she said, her voice steady, and Lana did. She spoke for 47 minutes. No slides, just truth. After the meeting, reporters swarmed the sidewalk outside the tower. They wanted sound bites, drama, emotion. She gave them none of that. Instead, she repeated one line. "This is not about one company. This is about a culture. One that rewards silence and punishes conscience." Then she left, not for home, but for a studio in Brooklyn, where she recorded the first episode of a new podcast titled Quiet Room. Each episode featured stories from interns, janitors, assistants, nurses, teachers' voices that rarely made it to boardrooms, but who carried the weight of every decision made there. She didn't narrate it like a show. She narrated it like a wound. Episode 2, The Woman Who Cleaned the CEO's Office. Her name was Emma Hall, immigrant, single mother, had worked at Callow and Hurst for 9 years. She'd noticed files in the trash with shredded receipts from international transactions. She had told no one until Lana gave her space to speak. "I knew something was wrong," Amhal said on the recording, "but I didn't have the words. I didn't have the right kind of English." Lana's voice entered after a long pause. And that's how institutions survive, on the myth that truth needs credentials. The episode went viral. Again, 6 months passed. The company settled out of court with several impacted communities. A watchdog group was formed. Lana was appointed as one of its founding members. Unpaid. She insisted on that. Accountability, she said, should never become a revenue stream. The original CEO stepped down. Ruth Bannister issued another statement. This time, she mentioned Lana by name. Lana didn't respond publicly. Instead, she focused on building something beyond headlines. She established a fund, The Witness, fellowship for young people of color, entering fields where silence was often expected: legal, finance, medicine, journalism. Her mission was simple: teach them how to speak truth and protect themselves when they do. One evening, she received a letter, not an email, a printed letter, folded with care. It was from an intern at another major firm, this one a pharmaceutical giant. The letter read, "They told me to shred a report on failed clinical trials in rural India. I remembered your voice. I kept the copy. I'm scared, but I'm ready." Lana exhaled deeply. She knew what it meant to be ready. The cost, the weight, the risk. She wrote back, not advice, not reassurance, but a question. What story do you want the world to remember? The next morning, she walked into a panel discussion on ethical leadership. Her name was listed beside best-selling authors, former senators, and corporate reformers. She didn't wear a suit. She wore the same white shirt, because symbols matter. When it was her turn to speak, she said, "Real change doesn't happen when a black woman is finally invited to the table. Real change happens when she builds a new one and brings chairs for everyone the system forgot." Applause, but she didn't stay for the photos. She had another meeting to attend with a group of teenage girls from East Harlem who wanted to start a media collective. They had no budget, no exposure, just fire in their voices. She told them, "Start recording. Don't wait for permission." That night, she walked alone down Malcolm X Boulevard, the city humming beneath her feet. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't afraid. She was becoming what she never saw growing up, a woman who tore down walls without apology. And in her silence, she smiled, because she knew the next voice would be louder than hers, and it would belong to someone who once thought they had none. The headlines faded, as they always do. Attention moved on. Scandals rotated. Another CEO fell. Another company issued its templated apology. Another report, another task force, another cycle of reactive reform. But Lana didn't disappear with the newsfeed, because she was never chasing virality. She was chasing infrastructure, the kind you can't tweet, the kind built in silence, sweat, and stubbornness. She now worked from a shared office space in the Bronx, no corner window, no polished floor, just chipped desks, loud radiators, and long nights. It was perfect, because it was real. She surrounded herself with truth-tellers, former whistleblowers, data analysts turned advocates, multilingual interns who translated injustice across borders. They didn't wear suits. They wore tired eyes and open hearts. Together, they built Archive, a secure platform for documenting corporate abuse anonymously, pairing every submission with legal support and a trauma-informed review team. They launched it quietly. No press release. Just a message on Lana's now private page. You are never crazy. You are never alone. And you are always right to notice. Within 24 hours, over 300 submissions came in. From nurses, from contract workers, from undocumented employees, from graduate students. Each one a page of truth no boardroom had ever read. One case changed everything. It came from a young man in Kansas warehouse staff at a logistics conglomerate. His sister had died after being denied coverage for a workplace injury labeled non-critical. He sent the documents, medical forms, rejected claims, internal memos advising staff to discourage escalation. He didn't want money. He wanted acknowledgement. "I just want someone to say her name," he wrote. She wasn't disposable. Lana wept, not just for the loss, but for the pattern. Because the stories always ended the same way, ignored until exposed. Grieved in silence, names erased. She added his sister's name, Jasmine O., to a growing wall inside the archives office. Handwritten, no logos, no slogans, just names. That fall, Lana gave a lecture at Columbia University, not to business students, but to public health scholars. She spoke about systems, not people. "Stop asking who failed," she said. "Ask what design made their failure inevitable." She told them, institutional harm isn't an accident, it's an algorithm. And until you disrupt the code, nothing changes. When someone asked her how she stayed hopeful, she said, "I'm not hopeful. I'm committed. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Callow and Hearst rebranded. New logo, new mission statement, same roots. But they couldn't erase the audit reports, now public record. They couldn't erase the community councils, now legally tied to funding. They couldn't erase the voices she'd empowered. They tried to offer her an official role again, this time, Vice President of Ethical Innovation. She declined, twice, because you can't reform a house that insists its foundation isn't cracked. You build another house. And so she did. With grants, microdonations, and sweat equity, Lana co-founded the Marrow Institute, a school without walls, dedicated to training first-generation professionals to navigate, expose, and redesign the systems that tried to consume them. She didn't teach theory. She taught strategy. Your story is data, she told them. Your silence has always been someone else's comfort. The first cohort had only 12 students. Each one arrived carrying shame they didn't earn. Each one left with tools. Lana rarely took interviews anymore. But one day, a young journalist, barely 20, still stumbling over questions, asked her something different. "Do you think they fear you now?" Lana smiled without malice. "No," she said. "They fear the precedent I set." She leaned forward, and they should. Then came the hearing. A congressional subcommittee on international corporate accountability. They invited her as an expert witness. Some had expected her to grandstand. She didn't. She arrived with a binder. No speeches, just names. Of communities displaced, of workers injured, of employees silenced, and of those who spoke and paid the price. She read them all into the record, even when the room shifted, even when time ran out, even when a senator whispered, "We've got enough." She kept reading because they'd never heard the names before. And now they had. After the hearing, a young black woman approached her outside the marble building. She held a clipboard, wore shoes too worn for D.C., and eyes too wise for her age. "I watched your live that day," she said, barely louder than the wind, "when they tried to shut you down. I was 16. That was the first time I saw someone like me speak without asking." Lana placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now it's your turn." The marble halls didn't remember her, but the world did. Not as a headline, not as a scandal, but as a shift. She had proven that voice could be structure, that exposure could be protection, that truth, wielded precisely, could dismantle entire empires of silence. And as she sat on a worn subway seat again, white shirt wrinkled, inbox full, future uncertain, she felt something rare. Not relief, not victory, but readiness. Because somewhere, another young woman was being told she wasn't allowed to speak. And soon, she would. Months passed. The world kept spinning, distracted, chaotic, selective in its outrage. New movements rose. Old wounds reopened. Another hashtag trended. Another face filled a timeline for a week, then vanished. But Lana had never been chasing visibility. She was chasing permanence. And permanence required one thing above all: legacy. In a quiet ceremony held in the same East Harlem Community Center where she once read the first draft of her revelations, Lana unveiled a mural. It wasn't of her. It wasn't of victims. It was a mural of doors. Every single one had a plaque underneath. Denied. Silenced. Fired. Unqualified. Too young. Too black. And beneath all of them, a single line painted in gold: "We walked through anyway." The room fell into a silence deeper than applause. Not reverence, recognition. Because the faces watching were not strangers. They were nurses, cleaners, delivery drivers, researchers, teachers, youth workers, students, parents, fighters, people who had once knocked, begged, waited, and who now built their own thresholds. Lana took the stage in the corner. No microphone, no script. Just her voice, the same one that had once been dismissed with a smirk in a boardroom. "When they shut the door in your face," she said slowly, "they're not protecting power. They're protecting fear, because when truth gets in, it reorders the room." She let that land. "You are not a disruption," she continued. "You are the correction." That was her final line. There was nothing more to say. The next day, she woke to a message from a student at the Marrow Institute. They had just presented a corruption report at their university, documenting systemic exploitation of graduate researchers in unpaid medical trials overseas. It was already trending. The student wrote, "They said I was too emotional. I said yes. So were the victims." Lana laughed, not in amusement, but in awe. The baton had moved. The fire had leapt. Later that week, she took the train to a school in Newark. No press. No cameras. Just a group of teenagers asking questions about justice, truth, and fear. One boy, maybe 15, asked, "But what if you speak and nothing changes?" She nodded. "I've lived that," she said. "But the goal isn't always immediate change. Sometimes it's to disrupt the lie, to refuse silence, to let someone watching know they're not the only one who sees the cracks." She paused, and cracks always spread. That's how light gets in. That evening, she sat at her desk, alone, surrounded by files, testimonies, and a growing list of names who had come forward through archive. No champagne, no celebration, just clarity. She opened a blank document. She titled it, "For the Ones Still Waiting to Speak," and she began writing a manual, not a memoir, a guide for how to survive the aftermath, what to expect when power strikes back, what healing actually looks like after you've told the truth and been shattered by it. It would be published anonymously. It wasn't about her. It was about them. A knock on her door. A courier. An envelope. Inside, a letter from a major university. They wanted to name a lecture series after her. The Lana Jones Initiative for Institutional Accountability. She stared at the paper, not out of pride, but out of grief, because part of her still remembered sitting in that boardroom, voice ignored, eyes burning, told she wasn't allowed to speak. And now they wanted to teach her story. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She wasn't interested in honors. She was interested in momentum. The final moment came months later, not with noise, but with a whisper. A woman stood outside the archive building, older, weathered, dressed like she came straight from work, shoes dusty, sleeves rolled. She didn't introduce herself. She simply said, "My daughter heard your voice during a live stream. She was 14. That's when she stopped trying to be invisible." Lana's throat tightened. The woman reached into her pocket and handed Lana a note. It said, "Thank you for speaking, so we knew it was possible." That was all, and it was enough. As the sun dipped low, painting the windows gold, Lana stood in front of the mural again, the one with the doors. She touched one of the plaques that read, "Silenced." Then, quietly, she added a new one. It didn't say victory. It didn't say justice. It simply said, "Opened," because that's what she had done, and what others would now continue to do. Not burn the house down, not beg to be let in, but build, door by door, the world that had been denied to them, and leave it open behind them, for all who would come next.